They say it's the biggest deal ever made. Trump stood at the podium, proud, defiant. We're doing things that have never been done before, and our country is becoming very rich again. But behind the scenes, America's auto industry was panicking, because this so-called biggest deal ever might go down as one of the costliest strategic mistakes in U.S. trade history. It started with a threat. A surprise 25% tariff on all Japanese cars entering the U.S. There was no crisis, no provocation. Just Trump flexing muscle, convinced Japan would fold. They didn't. Instead, Tokyo retaliated quietly, methodically. They waited, planned, and when the time was right, they struck back in a way that almost brought the American economy to its knees. What followed was a rushed backtrack, a new deal, and a growing sense of betrayal inside America's heartland. So, how did Trump go from boasting about a trade victory to handing Japan everything it wanted? Let's break it down. The threat that backfired. Trump's 25% tariff threat was designed to strong-arm Japan into a new auto agreement. But it wildly underestimated who he was dealing with. Japan isn't a weak trading partner. It's the third largest economy in the world, a critical American ally, and most importantly, the largest foreign holder of U.S. debt, with over $1 trillion in Treasury bonds. When Trump issued the threat, Japanese leaders didn't panic. They remained silent through their tense national elections. But after the ruling party lost its parliamentary majority, largely due to perceived humiliation by the U.S., the gloves came off. Tokyo had leverage, and they were prepared to use it. Behind closed doors, Japanese officials discussed two nuclear options: dumping U.S. Treasury bonds, which would spike interest rates, and crash global markets, pulling Toyota, Honda, and Nissan manufacturing out of the U.S., eliminating nearly 1 million jobs and devastating regional economies from Kentucky to Ohio. Both moves would have crushed American stability. And that's when Trump blinked. Backtrack. In a rushed compromise, Trump cut the threatened tariff from 25% down to 15%, spinning it as a new and historic deal. But here's the catch. Japan gave up almost nothing. They kept their U.S. access, maintained their auto parts supply chains, and walked away with lower tariffs and rising stock prices. Meanwhile, American automakers Ford, GM, and Stellantis got slapped with a brutal reality. They're still paying higher tariffs to move their cars across North America. This wasn't a deal. It was a retreat. Detroit's betrayal. To Detroit, this wasn't just bad policy. It was personal. Union leaders were furious. The American Automotive Policy Council issued a blistering statement condemning the Japan deal. Why? Because while Japan now enjoys 15% tariffs, American companies face 25% tariffs on parts and vehicles imported from Mexico and Canada, key hubs in U.S. auto production. That's right. Japan got better terms than the United States did within its own trade zone. America's auto crisis. The timing couldn't be worse. American automakers are already struggling. In 2023, Toyota outsold every U.S. brand, not just in units, but in reputation. They led in reliability, fuel efficiency, and resale value. Ford is losing profits. GM is laying off workers. Stellantis is retreating from global markets entirely. And iconic brands are fading fast. Chrysler now sells just one model in the U.S. Buick survives almost entirely on Chinese sales. Lincoln is losing to Lexus and Acura. Add a sudden 25% spike in import costs for essential parts, batteries, electronics, sensors, and the fragile system begins to crack. Meanwhile, Japan's automakers, many of which already manufacture inside the U.S., avoid these extra costs entirely. The jobs at stake. This isn't just about boardroom losses or corporate margins. These companies anchor communities. Entire towns in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana rely on automaker payrolls. If just one major U.S. brand collapses, tens of thousands of jobs vanish overnight, along with dealerships, service shops, and local tax bases. And globally, the picture is even worse. In Africa, Asia, and South America, American cars are already struggling to compete with Japan's. They're seen as bulky, gas-guzzling, and expensive. Now, thanks to tariffs, they'll be even pricier and less competitive abroad. So if U.S. automakers can't compete at home and can't grow abroad, what's left? A dangerous precedent union leaders are sounding the alarm. Tony Toddy, president of UAW Local 14 in Ohio, summed it up bluntly: Japan doesn't buy American cars. So what's the point of this deal? He's right. In 2024, Japan imported just 16,000 American vehicles. Meanwhile, the U.S. imported over $40 billion in Japanese cars and parts. This new agreement does nothing to correct that imbalance. Worse, it sets a precedent, one that weakens the U.S. position in upcoming negotiations with Canada, Mexico, and more urgently, China. If 15% becomes the new normal, America risks giving away its strongest leverage again: the China threat. Industry insiders are already bracing for the next shock: Trump's looming auto negotiations with China. China's auto sector is turbocharged with subsidies. It's preparing to flood global markets with ultra-cheap electric vehicles, EVs, closing parenthesis. If Trump applies the same soft-touch strategy with Beijing that he used with Tokyo, U.S. automakers may never recover. Union leaders fear a repeat of the Japan fiasco. Vague investment pledges in exchange for low tariffs, while China gains access to American markets with no real accountability. The stakes couldn't be higher. Who really benefits? Trump keeps touting $550 billion in Japanese investment as proof of success. But here's the truth. Much of that figure includes pre-existing private plans, not new commitments. The majority of those investments aren't tied to union jobs or even permanent employment. And most of it isn't coming from the Japanese government at all. So who really wins here? Japan gets lower tariffs and rising car exports. American automakers get higher costs, global decline, and deeper financial strain. Consumers get hit with inflation. And workers? They're left wondering what happened to the promise of protection. Let's talk numbers. General Motors lost $1.1 billion last quarter from tariffs alone. By year's end, GM projects $5 billion in lost capital, not from falling demand, but from chaotic trade policy. That's money not going to innovation, expansion, or hiring. Across the board, car companies are holding off on investments, not because they can't grow, but because they don't know what the rules will be next week. And it all traces back to a deal made in haste to fix a crisis that never needed to happen. Trump says this is a win. The media says it's historic. Japan says thank you, but Detroit says nothing because they're still trying to figure out what just happened. If Japan got lower tariffs, more exports, and stronger protections, and the U.S. got higher costs, more layoffs, and angry unions, then what exactly was this deal supposed to protect?